also bear witness and testify that 1400 years ago, a human being, a man, named Muhammad ibn Abdullah, came to this earth and was blessed with the last, final, perfect revelation of Almighty Allah to mankind, which we know today as the Holy Quran. This book is free of any deviation, any distortion, any error, any departure from the truth. So we say these things in long form in English that we may understand them. We say them in Arabic that we may remember them. When we say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, the constitution that binds man to God and therefore man to man. As to what follows, every time one reads the Quran, one develops a different sense of something that you saw in a verse that you didn't see in a verse before. Because the instructions in the Quran are not revealed almost in the way that a menu is in a fast food restaurant. There are many ways to interpret things, many different shades of meaning that one encounters from the stories and the teaching that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala imparts to us. And that is why the Quran is written in poetry but translated into prose. The poetry are the stories that we remember and the incidents that sit in our minds, but the prose are how we translate those things into our actions in day-to-day life. And so it was that I was drawn for some reason this week to the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, who was known also as the friend of Almighty Allah. And Ibrahim, at one point in his life, had gone on a great journey of discovery to understand who might God be. For those who may or may not remember, Ibrahim's father was one of the chief idol makers in his particular time. So he benefited from an old system of religion that said men should pray to stones, and that there were many possible gods and all this sort of thing. So Ibrahim was born into that kind of a situation, and yet he went on a search for God because something didn't rub him right about what he was presenting. Something made no sense to him. So he goes on his vast search, and ultimately Prophet Ibrahim comes to the conclusion that there is only one God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the interesting part. This is what happens next. So Ibrahim acts on what he knows. He speaks to the people, and then they say to him, through many different incidents, the central of which was he embarrasses their idols. He takes various things from one idol, puts it on another, damages another, and then when people ask what happened, he says, why don't you ask the one idol what happened? Explain it to you. See what he says. They said, how can this stone speak? And Ibrahim says, why would you worship someone that could not speak? Anyway, at this point, Ibrahim had an understanding of the nature of his people, and so what they said was, look, you have mocked our ways, you have mocked the ways that our fathers were doing before you. This was their defense of their way of life. Put him into the fire. And this was the episode and incident that really registered in my mind in a way that perhaps it had not the first 15, 20 times one reads the Quran. What is the level of faith that a man would require to stand in a fire as a result of something he said that really had no benefit to himself? I mean, Ibrahim was not asking people to give him money, to make him king, to hand him the best farmland or the most goats and sheep. He was ordered to stand in a fire because he talked about something that would benefit people around him rather than himself. What is the level of faith that is required for a man to stand in fire? And how does that level of faith compare to anyone, but specifically the Muslims, who claim to be those who follow the ways of Ibrahim? Now let us be clear, I'm not asking people to stand in the fire. I can see it now. Toronto's son, Iran asks Muslims to stand in fire. This is his message. And so it is the people who would look for almost anything to make fun of Muslims and minimize the truth of what we're saying can distort it. But if you're going to misquote me, then at least run the whole tape. What I'm saying is that the central message one gets from the life of Prophet Ibrahim, from the life of Isa alayhi salam, from the life of Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, from the life of the companions of Abu Bakr Siddiq, the ones that we admire the most, the Zain al-Abidin, and many of the stories that I will tell, is that the central message of this way of life can be summarized in two words: be accountable. So I want to talk first about what does accountability mean, because I believe we've taken this concept and we've distorted it. Accountability means not that you can necessarily plan every single thing in your life. This is not accountability. There are many people who they try something, it doesn't work, and they say, oh, that relieves me of the responsibility to try to plan anything else. We believe in our way of life that a man may not know how much money he will earn when he gets up in the morning. We believe a man doesn't know what country it is in which he's going to die. We believe that a man may not know many things that are known to God. And yet, we're told in the Holy Quran that he who does an atom's weight of good will feel it. And he who does an atom's weight of evil will feel it. So the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to mankind is not that we are supposed to be responsible for every outcome in life. But we are responsible for the effort we make towards an outcome in life. And there is all the difference. We don't know from one day to the next if we'll be hit with a flood, if we'll be hit with a famine, if we'll be hit with a promotion or a raise, we'll be blessed with 20 God-fearing children or none. We don't know the answers to everything that will come to us in life, but what we are responsible for is our response to those outcomes, our effort, our striving. Be assured that Ibrahim alayhi salam had no idea whether that fire would be his last moment. But he made the decision that what he knew he had to share with people because it was a matter of major importance. Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on many occasions after battles, told the companions that if he was to die, it was in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it would be up to them to follow what he had taught them to that point or not. He had no assurance of a specific life by a specific date, by a specific outcome. He had no assurance that this many people would accept Islam, and many times, he prayed and prayed, and you hear in the message of the Quran, let not their lack of faith grieve you, O Muhammad. Meaning, he didn't know who was going to convert or not convert until we get to that epic episode in Taif where the people are throwing garbage on him, and the angels come to him and ask if they can destroy the people around for the insults and injury and damages they've done this beautiful man. And he says, no, maybe their children will be Muslims. Again, notice the greatness of character, the greatness of heart, and the emotion of all that, but also notice the maybe. He didn't say, definitely their children will be Muslims. He didn't know. He didn't know. Even though he was blessed with knowledge of many things that a normal man would never know, at the end of the day, he was a normal man. He was a mortal man in the sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who makes the decision in all things. Right? And so it was that Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ibrahim alayhi salam, Isa alayhi salam, Musa, all of the greatest people that we admire and respect and follow and wish to be in the company of on the Day of Judgment, they were accountable for their effort. They were accountable for their striving. And the Holy Quran talks about strive together as in a race towards all that is good. It doesn't say that you will be held responsible for everything that occurs because some things are out of your hands. It doesn't say that all of us will be rich. It doesn't say that all of us will be poor. The Quran is not about guaranteeing outcome. The Quran is about inviting us to effort, to be accountable, to recognize that, as it says in another ayah, one day you will know little after having known much. It doesn't say by the 14th year and the 15th day, or the clock is set this long. For some people it may be 100 years. For some people it may be 10. But the message is that everything that is given to you for a period of time. But it is given to you and it is measured. So be accountable. So what is accountability? Accountability is what we strive to understand about Allah and His Deen, and what we strive to do to execute against that understanding. It is not necessarily the success or failure of what we do. This is in the hands of God. But our effort is absolutely under our control. Ibrahim alayhi salam did not know that everybody around him would convert. He did not definitively know that he would end up in the fire or that he would be saved from the fire. What he knew was that there is one God. And he knew that this nonsense of 50 idols that were made by men who are suddenly expected to be worshipped made no sense. And he spoke about what he knew because he was accountable to what he knew. And this is what separates a man who can stand in fire and not be touched from the state that the Deen is today, where we have 1 billion people and none of the things that we say we believe are present in the world to the extent that we believe them. We say that we believe that the poor should benefit from the rich. And yet, in one Muslim country, we have enough resources in 13 days to feed every poor person in the world. We know this. And how many years, 50, 60 years have passed where this has been true and nothing has been done? In this city, we have enough money. 100,000 Muslim families, 10,000 each, to create $1 billion fund. What we do with that fund, I'm not the one to say. I don't know everything. But I know that if we put $1 billion together for the people in this city, that we could create wealth, create education, create jobs, but we don't do it. And this has been true for at least the last 20 years. So I'm not here to tell you that I have the answers to things, but I am here to tell you that we can measure the effort. We can measure the effort. And whether it's the effort at a personal level, the effort at a city level, or the effort at the level of an entire ummah, we are not accountable. We are not acting like one day we will be accountable to the judgment of God. And this is contradicting the central message of our entire way of life. You have to look no further than this. Accountability is not that we generate a certain outcome by a certain date, but that we strive with everything we have towards what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us is right. A 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old child knows what is right. He knows that sick people need to be taken care of. He knows that the old need help from God. He knows that the hungry need food from those who have it. He knows that people need work and dignity and discipline and hope. These are not complicated things. But the second part of what I wish to say to you is, so what happened to our accountability? What happened to the accountability of non-Muslim people? Why is the world the way that it is? If it is so simple to understand what we need to do, why is it so hard to see it actually done? And I tell you, in this there is also a very simple answer. And it comes from another reading of Surah Al-Baqarah. I've often talked about Surah Al-Baqarah as how people destroy the religion by making it, by having an intention not to follow it. But if we go back, again, when you read the Quran 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 times, the same story hits you in a different way than it did the first time. And you realize how little we know. But if we go back to the central story of Surah Al-Baqarah, which I remind you very quickly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the children of Israel, sacrifice a cow. And the children of Israel begin asking him, what size cow, what color cow, what size tail, what shade of cow, many, many questions. And the central message from this, of course, is that they weren't really interested in sacrificing the cow. But there is another way to look at this. Another way to look at this that had escaped me, Allah forgive me, for many years. And I realized it, is that we major in minor things. We take our accountability for major things, which have all failed. And the reason we don't do anything about those things is we are so focused on small things. So instead of being focused on, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me to sacrifice a cow, their focus was on what color cow. Instead of being focused on how many poor people are there in this community, what skills do they lack, and who can provide them, we argue about, what length of beard does this brother have or that brother have? Or who should be president of this? Or how much money should we allocate towards this dinner versus that dinner? Or who is from what culture or race, or what color skin or what tribe, or who speaks my language or somebody else's language? Just like the Bani Israel with the cow, we are accountable for minor things. And this is no accident. Because what happened to the Muslim way of life was that it was taken from us. It was taken from us by people who did not wish to be accountable as rulers, and we accepted those rulers. Very early on, we had rightly guided people who were accountable. Abu Bakr Siddiq was so accountable, that he was reading a letter using a lamp, kerosene. And his daughter comes to him with a letter. And he says, who is this letter addressed to? And she says to her father, you, my father. He says, me personally or the state? You personally. Closes the lamp. Pulls out another lamp, which was his personal lamp. Puts kerosene in the personal lamp from this personal thing, turns it on, and then reads it. He did not want the light from the lamp that the people had paid for to be used for even 1 second to read a letter that was addressed to him personally. This is accountability. So we move from the leadership of someone like Abu Bakr to the leadership of those who followed after Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu. And we see that these people began to violate basic commandments of the Quran. They gave power to their sons rather than to those who were best fit. They imprisoned scholars and rightly guided people who would call and tell people the truth regardless of what consequence it was. They began to suppress various forms of hadith and tradition and education because it might get in the way of their accumulation of wealth privately. And so Islam was attacked not by anybody other than Muslims, people who said they were Muslims, who wanted to take the Islamic way of life that was treated by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that wiped out all tribes, all races, all nationalities. Think about this. Rasul ﷺ 1400 years ago had a black man call the prayer. had a Persian man advise him on military strategy, had people from a tribe known for robbery in Abu Dhar as among his central and closest companions, married one of the noblest women in the society to his former slave. So everything was open for reevaluation. Everything, tribe, money, race, country, nationality, except for following Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what did people do after that? Shortly after that, after the four rightly guided Khalifa, they became the Umayyads or the Abbasids, people who are descended by what? Tribe, race, bloodline, nationality. And so everything beautiful about this deen began to be attacked by termites. Termites as in people who wish to put their own way of thinking ahead of the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, in order to keep the people focused away from the central crime that had been committed, we major in minor things. And so it is, are you Hanbali or Sunni or Shia? Is your beard 14.67 inches long? Do you walk, do you say this kalma with your right foot when you enter the masjid? I don't say these things to mock these things as in they don't matter. Everything in deen matters. Everything in deen matters. Everything in deen matters. You shouldn't ignore a child if he asks you for a greeting. You shouldn't make a mistake in your wudu. You shouldn't raise your voice even to say chuf to your parents. These all matter. Wallahi, as I stand here, I will not diminish any of that. But one of the lessons of being Ahl Sunnah, one of the lessons of following Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is not just to follow what he did, but to follow when he did it. You see, Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, I give you an example, was confronted by great evil. There was drinking in the society. The Arabs are among the great drinkers of all time. Really, I mean, even the Romans and others were impressed by the level of this. We used to get drunk, everything revolved around alcohol. The poetry revolved around it, wars were fought around it, the pursuit of women revolved around it, many, many things revolved around this. Alcohol was like a cancer through the entire society. Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, what did he do? He banned the alcohol in 6 stages. You see? It's not just what he did, it's when and how he did it. This is part of the Sunnah. So it is when you see an evil in the society, you attack it in stages. But this is part of the lesson of Sunnah. It's not just that he did something. It's how he did it, when he did it, why he did it. This is what it means to say that we follow somebody. If you follow somebody and someone drives a car and you say, I wish to become a driver like him, and he drives at 200 kilometers an hour and you've never been in the car, when you start, this would not be the way to follow him. To follow him is to say, how did he learn to drive the car? What courses did he take? What paths did he take? What car did he start with? What car did he graduate to? What car does he now drive? So to follow someone isn't just to follow an outcome, it's to follow his path. And so if we look at Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we see that there was a definite path. But we have abandoned this path and we try to get to the end. Because people tell us that we judge by the end rather than the path. So Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam saw people were being charged interest, he banned interest among people. He saw that people's armies were used to oppress. He made armies out of the citizens, so that force was given to everybody. He saw that people had institutions that divided them by race and by tribe, so he created a new one called the mosque, the masjid. He saw that people were discriminating against each other so many ways, so he said Muslims are brothers to another Muslim, to the point where one Muslim felt if another was his brother, he had 40 years of obligation to him if that brother passed away, to his family. There was a path. There was a path. And so when I'm saying that we major in minor things, it's not to mock the things that people are focused on, but it is to say that the time to focus on them. Some things you do at the end, some things you do at the beginning. If people are starving in the society, then you have to feed them. You don't go to people who are starving and start saying, okay, now you know, the way you do your salah, your intonation on the 3rd rak'ah is incorrect. You feed the man. Because once he understands that God loves him so much that one of his own servants would drop everything to feed him, maybe he thinks in his own head, I wish to perfect my own salah. Because this God has honored me in a way that I had not imagined or deserved. You see, there is a timing and a sequence to things. And we have obliterated this timing. So the major priorities Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had were obvious. And they're in the stories that we heard. But this is why accountability has changed. Literacy, as an example. Education. How did he achieve it? After the wars, they had prisoners. instead of just slaughtering the prisoners with blood vengeance, which was the custom of the time, he said anybody who knows how to read and write can obtain his freedom as a prisoner by teaching one Muslim how to read and write. You don't think this puts priority on literacy and education? The man freed people who were trying to kill him. Let's be very specific about this. These were not people who wrote an article in a Globe and Mail and they were kind of mildly critical